Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, "And HOA doesn't allow grass signs for any reason." Understood. A family friend lives in a neighborhood with an HOA. They are not horrible, but they are prickly at times. One year, he hosted a large birthday party and put some temporary signs up. These were for things like what side of the street to park on, where his house was, when the party ends, and to come to the backyard instead of in the house. He had approval for the party and a paperwork trail of conversations going back a month. Imagine his surprise when a few days later he gets a $200 fine for those road signs. He contacts the HOA to complain, but he gets stonewalled. As he pays the fine, the guy at the desk says the worst thing. "Next time, read the rules." That ticked him off, as he made an effort to follow the rules. The day after, he reads the rules and there is a sentence about all grass signs. Clearly, it's intended to keep those political signs away, but nowhere does it say, "No political signs." He takes some time and gets his plan together. He buys some political signs for the local city council members and judges he supports that are up for election. He then tapes them against his car windows so they are on the inside pointing out. For a good measure, he added some bumper stickers for the ACLU, Peace Corps, the Teachers Union, NAACP, and whatever else he could find in an evening. Every so often, he keeps his car at the end of his driveway so all driving into the complex can see. As he put it, it's a petty rebellion, but a rebellion nonetheless. Next one is titled, "You Want a Trade-In?" My first truck served me well, but I can affectionately say that it was truly a POS. In the first place, I only bought it because I had borrowed it from an ex and wrecked it, punching a hole in the radiator and warping the head when I drove it away. Since I was a student, I didn't want to pay for repairs, so I replaced the parts myself from junkyard finds. It also started to develop a real problem with rust along all the seams, which I fixed with liberal applications of spray paint. I drove the truck for several years, until I started to notice that every time I drove through a puddle, I ended up with a fountain coming from the floor. A quick inspection revealed that the floorboards too had rotted along the frame, and I was in danger of falling out onto the highway. To fix that, I zip-tied a couple of 2x4s to the frame, under the seat. In the meantime, I had started a decent-paying job in an office. My boss was so embarrassed by my truck that he forbid me parking by the office, said clients would think he underpaid me. So, you can imagine how happy he was when I informed him I was going to buy a new car. As it turned out, my local dealer was having a big sale. I found a sweet Honda Accord I liked, but it was a little more than I wanted to pay. The overly helpful salesman was practically drooling to make the sale. He told me that the dealership was having a promotion where they took any car for $1,000. I'm an honest person. I joked that there was no way they wanted my truck. He was certain they did. I asked him, twice, to at least go take a look. He told me to just give him the keys and we'd be good. We signed all the papers, and I left with my sweet new car. As it turned out, I had to go back 2 weeks later to finish some paperwork. The salesman saw me across the show floor and was upset, yelling how I'd stuck him with a POS. While I kind of felt bad, I just laughed and reminded him I'd warned him. I drove that Honda for several years, best car ever. Next one is titled, "Don't Rush the Judge." This is my dad's story, although not his malicious compliance. A few decades ago, Dad was a painter and carpenter who would do freelance work, and occasionally a person would refuse to pay. These people were usually well off, so it wasn't about the money, they were just the kind of person who liked getting one over on others. Unfortunately for the deadbeats, like most contractors, Dad had experience with this. He wouldn't lie down and accept it. He'd take them to court and get a payment order. Sometimes, though, you'd get a real butthole who couldn't let it go. This guy, deadbeat, refused to pay in full even after a court order. Instead, he said he'd pay in installments, something like $5 a week. The debt would take years to pay off at that rate. So Dad went off to court again. This time the court was packed. There were a lot of cases before the judge, and Dad's wasn't for a while, so he settled in to wait and listen to the courtroom drama. For one case, Dad realized a hotshot young lawyer was eloquently representing a contractor in exactly the same situation. Hotshot said payment in small installments was unfair to the worker, went against the contract that both parties signed, amounted to stealing money out of the pocket of a hard-working man, yada, yada, etc., etc. Hotshot was working hard to prove his fee was worth it, and he was making a righteous argument. The judge decided in favor of Hotshot's client, and the success went to Hotshot's head. Your Honor, I have another similar case on your docket later today. In the interest of efficiency, would you like to look at that case now? The already quiet courtroom got a bit quieter, with an air of "did he just do that?" The judge was not pleased, but Hotshot was oblivious, and the judge got a glint in his eye. He rifled through his papers. A similar case? I know the one, except you're representing the defendant, Mr. Deadbeat, right? Is the plaintiff, Mr. Dad, here? Dad stood up and replied, "Yes, Your Honor." Would you like to present your case? Well, Your Honor, I think Hotshot explained my argument wonderfully already. It looks like he did. Very well, in the interest of efficiency, I am deciding for Mr. Dad and against Mr. Deadbeat. Hotshot looked as if the judge had banged the gavel on his head instead of the bench. Dad got his money and got to leave early that day. Sometimes it pays to have a lawyer on your side. Next one is titled, Selling a Car as Is. Around 10 years ago I had someone abandon a '87 Volkswagen Westfalia on my property. The car ran fine, but the shifter linkage had disconnected while he was driving, so he had it towed to my house. Fast forward a year, the guy who owned it has moved away, the vehicle no longer starts, and neither of us want anything to do with it. He sends me the pink slip and I make an ad on Craigslist listing the vehicle for $300. I get a response the same day and a guy comes to check it out. As we are chatting, I explain the situation to the guy, tell him the vehicle ran great before it sat around, and if I could get it started that I would be asking more for it. I could tell that the guy didn't trust the story that I told him and asks me if it's okay if he checks out the vehicle. I tell him of course, but reiterate the point, if it ran the first would be asking a lot more for it. The guy spends the next 15 minutes going through the whole vehicle. He confirms that the vehicle is in great shape and that the linkage was indeed missing a bolt. At this point I'm annoyed and say one last time, yes, just like I said, the vehicle is in great shape, and if I could figure out how to get it started I would be asking a lot more for it. The guy then turns the key and hears that it turns over but doesn't start. He then opens the hood, sees that the distributor cap wasn't clipped on. He clips it back on, jumps in the driver's seat, and it starts right up. He jumps out and exciting claims, "I'll take it." I tell him, "Cool man, but I told you if it starts I'm going to be asking more for it, so the price is $500 now." He argues with me saying that it wasn't fair because he was the one who fixed it. He ended up leaving and I sold it the next day for $1,400, which was still a great deal for whoever bought it. Next one is titled, My Washing Machine Isn't Broken, Your Brain Is. Back when I was young and stupid I dated an absolute donut of a man who had no concept of taking responsibility for his actions. This included him moving in with me after 3 dates by using my spare key while I was at work, hijacking my garage to store his boss's materials over Christmas without telling me, drinking heavily, and yelling at me constantly about problems he was having with the washing machine. Now, my washing machine came with me from my apartment when I moved and I'd never had a single problem with it. So when he came to me screaming about how it had shrunk all his shirts I was very confused. He had ordered new shirts and put them in the wash, and I'd washed them and now none of them fit. After a full day of him calling me at work and harassing me about it, I discovered they'd sent him the wrong size. He never apologized. Here's where I finally had enough. He came to me at 10:30 on a Saturday morning with his cricket uniform and told me he was leaving for his game in half an hour and he needed a clean uniform. I reminded him that the minimum wash cycle on the machine was 35 minutes and I couldn't do anything about his dirty uniform. After he finished throwing a tantrum about how it hadn't been washed for 3 weeks, seriously, how do you wear the same uniform for 3 days in the hot sun and not notice that it hasn't been washed? He wore it for the 4th week. Another week passes and the uniform doesn't turn up in the laundry, so I let it go. The following Saturday he comes in again half an hour before he has to leave saying he needs his stuff washed. Now this uniform has been sitting in his bag in the hot sun with 4 games worth of sweat and grass and dirt marinating in it, and it smells a bit rough. Sorry, buddy, nothing I can do. He leaves with his dirty uniform after throwing a tantrum. Another week later, it's still in his bag in the car in the hot sun. The car that he uses for work, that he drives daily, that he locks when he's not in it. I couldn't get the stupid clothes out even if I wanted to. Saturday morning rolls around and here he is with this ducking uniform. I decide to implement malicious compliance, knowing that I haven't got enough time to dry it, and wash the stupid thing on the shortest cycle I can. He's not only running late, but his uniform is still heavily stained, smells terrible, and is soaking wet. He ends up wearing the wet uniform, leaves it in his car, and the crotch goes moldy. Yep, that was when I took him to a public place with lots of people and told him to get the hell out of my house. Surprisingly, he left peacefully, although I had to throw out several boxes of his boss's stuff after almost 2 years of trying to get him to come and pick it up. Next one is titled, The Day the Glassy Stood Still. So a little background before I start. The bar I work at is a lovely bar and everyone who works there is just an amazing coworker, so I don't have it out for anyone. I am employed as a Glassy, but I work the bar as well. On the day of the most recent UFC fight, we all expected to get utterly destroyed as the bar is fairly popular where it is, and we all shared the event on social media as much as we could. This put everyone in a high tense mindset, especially the managers. One of the managers who I get along with well approached me and said, "For today, I want you to just be doing glasses only. Not bar. Don't go past this area," drawing an imaginary line with her foot. "If I see you go past it, I won't be happy." I couldn't blame her for being this intense, it was going to be a stressful day after all. Now the layout of this bar from left to right goes, Glassy station, coffee machine, left bar taps and fridges, cocktail station, right bar taps and fridges, gaming and keno till. And the manager drew a line just after the coffee machine. After she left, my brain's cheeky cogs started turning and I pushed through the next set of glassware, polished what needed to be and just stood there, at the line, waiting. The manager eventually saw me holding 2 trays of clean glasses standing still at the line and gave me a puzzled look, so I, in return, gave her the most over-exaggerated confused face and shrug I could do. She then chuckled and said, "Fine, you can go past the line." I know it isn't an explosion of anger that is usually posted here, but it helped keep things from getting too tense behind the bar and I thought that was worth sharing. Next one is titled, Insane Father vs. Maliciously Compliant Son. Backstory, all throughout my life my dad has been the biggest source of stress for me. I've been the source of everything that goes wrong in his life since the day I was born, despite hardly ever being the one around when it happens. I'm the type of person who will tell you when I broke something, which I actually did when his dryer broke and I was standing there when it happened. The wheel that turns the drum snapped due to age while I was drying my clothes. I did the responsible thing and offered to go in half on their washer and dryer since they'd had the same one since 2004. They got a brand new Whirlpool set for around $1,200 USD. So I Venmo'd them $600 for it. Fast forward about a year after me being moved out of their house and on my own. 2 kids, rocking the single dad scene, apartment of my own. Went into the garden, a snake did appear. My washer and dryer broke within a week of each other. My dad takes every opportunity to hold the slightest amount of control over me and starts making demands that I only come between these certain specific hours and that I have to bring my own laundry soap, and once I'm done the clothes have to immediately be loaded into my car for transport. And that I have to buy them pizza when I come over, as I'm taking over their kitchen for about 4 hours. Keep in mind that he decided that I could only come during this time. So I've been going every Saturday for about 3 weeks to my parents' house to wash about 3 loads of clothes. The problem this time is that it's been about 1 month since I've washed either mine or my kids' bedding. I figured it wouldn't be a big deal to go ahead and bring those along, but that's what you get for thinking, my dad says when I come with the extra 3 loads of laundry. He yells as my mum is trying to tell him that it's okay and that it's not going to cause any problems, and tells me to go ahead and start my laundry. She takes my dad somewhere to distract him while I do laundry. Because since seeing how my friends' dads treat him, I've seen his behavior for what it is and don't take lightly to him treating me like the red-headed stepchild. I'm his biological child. We don't particularly like each other anymore. I do mine and my daughter's clothes before they get back. I start to load my son's clothes, which was 6 shirts, 6 pants, 6 pairs of socks, 6 underwear and 2 towels. He wears a 4T in clothes, in an 8 cubic feet. For those who use the metric system, that's the medium-size washer at a laundromat washer. Then my dad comes home and goes immediately into the washroom, stops the load, opens the top, and yells, "Good job, idiot, you did exactly what I told you not to do." I felt something inside me break. Instead of getting shouty and loud like I normally do, I went maliciously compliant. Malicious compliance. I devised the idea after ignoring my father's repeated attempts to bait me into a shouting match so he can forcefully remove me from his property, his favorite way of doing it, to only put one article in a load at a time. I went from putting a comforter, a sheet, and a pillowcase into a load at a time to one of those. My first load was my sheet, then my blanket, then my pillowcase, with each load being properly put on. The bulky sheets cycle took 1 hour and 15 minutes as to not damage his precious washer and dryer. A trip that usually takes me around 4 hours took me 12. I left my house at 9 AM and I just got back about a half hour ago. All my clothes got washed, my dad's in the doghouse for trying to throw me out of their house again, and I have a massive sense of relief that I was able to turn my father's massive need for control back on him. Next one is titled, "Fine, she can take photos up here." Context: I'm in my school's drama club and work backstage for high school productions. Sometimes, the middle school needs help, so high schoolers are called on to help. In this case, I was working spotlights with a middle schooler. The spot booth is at the back of the auditorium, has no lighting of its own, and no ceiling, only walls that go up to your chest. I was also not in a good mood, since I mainly felt like people kept dismissing and ignoring me. I came in for a rehearsal to find my other spotlight worker with a camera. It turns out she's in the middle school yearbook club, and she volunteered to take photos of the practice. I immediately see an issue with it. I do photography as a hobby, and I have a good bit of knowledge about photos. I warned her right away that she shouldn't take photos from the spot booth, since it's a poor angle and lighting, and that I could cover the spots by myself so she could take photos. She just looked at me confused, so I just left it and went up to the spot booth. Right before we start rehearsal, I see her climbing the ladder into the spot booth with the camera around her neck. I tried not to cringe at seeing an expensive camera so close to the metal rungs of the ladder and gave her the same advice. Don't take photos up here. They won't come out nice. There were 3 people in the booth below, 2 girls, 1 boy. One of the girls, likely the one who kept being snippy and annoying towards me, responded, "Don't tell her where she can and can't take photos." At this point, I'd already had to walkie that spots weren't ready, and my mood finally snapped. Fine, she can take photos up here. It went exactly as I expected. I could hear her shutter going way too slow on every shot, the kind that happens in low lighting. She had put herself as far from the stage and stage lights as possible up here. She kept having issues and spent most of the rehearsal sitting on a chair trying to adjust the camera settings. I never saw any of those photos, but I guarantee they weren't good. When it was finally over, I climbed down, got upset over something else I got snapped at for, and told them that I know what the hell I'm talking about since I'm a photographer, then stormed out. I only feel bad for the nice lady in charge of yearbooks. Last one is titled, "The Straw That Broke the Camel's Back." So back in the day when I was a button pusher, CNC type machine operator, I worked for a company that had a supervisor, Scrooge, that was an enormous Scrooge. He didn't like spending money at all. He also didn't like money being wasted, which was even a bigger deal to him. He had several complaints on him due to this. Machines not running properly, didn't have the right buff wheels, broken tools but still worked. Things of that nature. So I ran 6 EDM machines at a time. EDMs use brass wire. It was trouble enough staying stocked up on that. But I had this one notorious machine that loved to give me problems. Mainly the same problem. When feeding the wire using the machine function, it wouldn't feed properly. Doing it manually, it would work, but the wire would break when the machine started running immediately. So you had to find a sweet spot in order to get it to work, and that could take a while. So clearly, the machine needed some work and have parts replaced. I submitted repair requests for a year. At least once a week after it wasn't getting fixed within a sufficient amount of time. Okay, so, I was setting up a new job on this machine. This was out of a block of steel. I was near the end of the spool of wire. It wouldn't even get through the first pass before it ran out of wire. Running blocks of steel, the machines didn't like to go back to where it left off and restart. Also, on these blocks, run time for the first pass was upwards to 5 to 7 hours. So, to save time in the long run, I took that spool off, put it aside because I could use it for small and simple cut-off jobs in the future, and put a new spool on and go through the annoying wire feeding thing. Here comes Scrooge marching his way towards me to hand me some more jobs, and he notices the almost empty wire spool sitting there. Scrooge questions why I didn't finish that spool of wire. I explained to him that it wouldn't finish the first pass and time would be wasted in the middle of operation to switch out the wire and have to start the part from the beginning again. Scrooge says, no, put it back on now. Don't be wasteful. I tried to encourage that it would be best to have the new spool on and that I would use the near empty for future use. He didn't budge. So, I put it back on, and by the time I got the wire fed to where it didn't break, I had about 3 hours worth of wire left. So I replaced the spool again, and sure enough, about halfway through the first pass it ran out of wire. So I replaced the wire and restarted the machine from start. End of the day comes, I mark my downtime. I put 6 hours due to wire change. A reason I knew would catch upper management's eye. The next week, upper management, VP and president come marching out of their offices and head to my area. They don't look happy. I couldn't even get out a hello before they started going off. Why in the hell did a simple wire change take 6 GD hours, and further, why in the hell do you have a history of this on this machine? I had a smile on my face when I explained to them what had happened and mentioned that I also had repair requests in for at least a year. VP and president storm off, and not more than an hour later, Scrooge was being walked out of the company with a box of his things. I guess they were fed up with his crap as well as everyone else. Thanks for listening.